Hello everyone, now let us discuss about anatomy of musculoskeletal system part 3. In the current session we will be focusing on the classification of neurons. So first of all, what is a neuron? Neuron is a nerve cell consisting of cell body, dendrites and axon. Neuron is a basic unit of nervous system. It is a nerve cell consisting of cell body, dendrites and axon. In the next session, we will discuss in detail about the structure of neuron. As of now, let us focus on the classification. Coming to the classification of neuron, it is broadly categorized into two types: structural classification and functional classification. Coming to structural classification, based on the structure of the neuron, they are classified into unipolar, bipolar or multipolar. Unipolar has one process, bipolar has two processes and multipolar has multiple processes. Now, both structural and functional features are used to classify various neurons in the body. Coming to the structural classification, structurally neurons are classified according to the number of processes extending from the cell body. They can be unipolar, bipolar and multipolar. That is come from the down. Unipolar means it has only one process. Bipolar means two processes are there. Multipolar means many processes are there. When it comes to unipolar neurons, they have dendrites and one axon that are fused together to form a continuous process that emerges from the cell body. Here only one process is there, and these neurons are more appropriately called pseudo-unipolar neurons because they begin in the embryo as bipolar neurons. Now coming to bipolar neurons, they have one dendrite and one axon, that is two processes. They are found in the retina of eye, inner ear and the olfactory area of the brain. Olfactory is nothing but smell. Coming to multipolar neurons, usually they have several dendrites and one axon, and most neurons in the brain and spinal cord are of this type, as well as all motor neurons. This is an important statement. Most of the neurons in the brain and spinal cord are multipolar. They have several dendrites and one axon, and all the motor neurons are multipolar. By this we complete the structural classification of neurons. Now let us discuss a little more about unipolar neurons. As we have discussed earlier, they are called as pseudo-unipolar neurons because they are formed as bipolar neurons in the embryo. And during their development, the dendrites and axon fuse together and become a single process. And the dendrites of most unipolar neurons function as sensory receptors that detect the sensory stimuli such as touch, pressure, pain, or thermal stimuli. And the trigger zone for nerve impulses in the unipolar neuron is at the junction of the dendrites and axon. So what are dendrites, what is axon and what is the trigger zone, we will discuss in the next session. As of now, the trigger zone for nerve impulses in the unipolar neuron is at the junction of the dendrites and axon. The impulses that propagate towards the synaptic end bubbles. These cell bodies of most unipolar relocated in the ganglion of spinal and cranial nerves. The cell bodies of most of the unipolar neurons are located in the ganglia of spinal and cranial nerves. Some neurons are named. Apart from the structural and functional classification, some neurons are based on the name of histologist who first described them or from an aspect of their shape or appearance. For example, Purkinje cells are described by the histologist. Purkinje is the name of the histologist who described these fibers or cells, hence the name Purkinje cells in the cerebellum. And when it comes to pyramidal cells found in the cerebral cortex of brain, they have pyramid shaped cell bodies. So some neurons are named based on the histologist who first described them or for an aspect of their shape or appearance. Now here you can see the diagrammatic representation of structural classification of neurons. A multipolar neuron has many processes extending from cell body. A bipolar neuron has two and unipolar neuron has one process. That is the main difference between these processes. Here you can see this is the unipolar neuron. Here axon and dendrites are fused together to form a single process. And the trigger zone in case of unipolar neurons is between the junction of axon and dendrites. This is the trigger zone. This is axon and this is the trigger zone. This is bipolar neuron. It has one axon and one dendrite. This is axon and this is dendrite. When it comes to multipolar neuron, they have one axon and multiple dendrites. Here you can see the multiple dendrites in multipolar neuron. All motor neurons are multipolar and most of the neurons of brain and spinal cord are multipolar. Now coming to functional classification. The functional classification of neurons are categorized based on the functional classification. Neurons are categorized into three types: sensory or efferent neurons, motor or efferent neurons, interneurons or associated neurons. So functionally neurons are classified according to the direction in which nerve impulses is conveyed with respect to CNS. What is the basis for functional classification? The neurons are classified according to the direction in which a nerve impulse, direction of the nerve impulse or action potential is conveyed with respect to CNS. Sensory or efferent neurons. AF means towards. Ferent means carried. Sensory or efferent neurons, as the name indicates, they either contain sensory receptors at the distal end, that is nothing but dendrites, or are located just after sensory receptors, that are separate cells. Once an appropriate stimulus activates the sensory receptors, the sensory neuron forms an action potential in its axon and the action potential is conveyed into the CNS through cranial or spinal nerves. So sensory or efferent neurons, they convey action potential from sensory receptor to CNS. Most sensory neurons are unipolar in structure. Most sensory neurons are unipolar in structure. Coming to motor or efferent neurons, EF means away from. As the name indicates, they convey action potential away from the CNS to effectors, which are nothing but muscles or glands in the peripheral through cranial or spinal nerves. So sensory or efferent neurons, they bring action potential or information towards CNS. Whereas motor or efferent EF means away from. They convey the action potential away from the CNS to effectors. Effectors are nothing but muscles or glands in the peripheral nervous system to cranial or spinal nerves. Motor neurons are multipolar in structure. Most of the sensory neurons are unipolar in structure, whereas all motor neurons are multipolar in structure. The next is interneurons or association neurons, are mainly located within the CNS between sensory and motor neurons. Interneuron integrate incoming sensory information from sensory neurons and then elicit a motor response by activation of appropriate motor neuron. Most interneurons are multipolar in structure. So only sensory neurons are unipolar. Motor neurons and most of the interneurons are multipolar in structure. All motor neurons are multipolar in structure. And most of the sensory neurons are unipolar in structure. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for further videos on anatomy and physiology.